Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. This video is going to be my review of the upcoming Summon Showcase, which features Noelle and Joachim in their formal attire. This is another Gala Dragalia remix, and this time around Gala Luca comes back alongside these two new Wind Adventurers. So in this video I'll discuss the three characters who are featured at a rate up on the Summon Showcase. I'll give my initial take on whether or not you should summon, and we'll go into a little more depth on each of the characters and try to analyze their kits. So as for this Gala Dragalia remix, I think it basically just comes down to, are these characters must-haves for you? Are these some of the favorite characters you have in Dragalia Lost? Are these the reasons that you wake up and you want to play Dragalia Lost? Because looking at it, there's one strategic reason I think you want to pull here from a gameplay standpoint, but otherwise I do feel this is really just, it boils down to what it always does, right? Do you love Luca, do you love Noelle or Joachim and really want them? And I say love because I feel like we are at a point with our resources and our Wormite and summoning tickets that you have to make some hard choices right now. So later this month, we know we're getting our New Year's raid event coming back, the one that had Mitsuhide and Nobunaga. It's quite possible the Summon Showcase will come back alongside that, although only the event has been announced so far. And then at the end of the month, we know we're getting a Princess Connect collaboration, and Karina is going to be summonable on that. Even though she's not limited, she still might be somebody that players really want if they're familiar with Princess Connect. So yeah, we don't have a lot of summoning resources right now, and that's why I would say you have to kind of pick and choose. I'm sure there's some people who are still deciding today whether or not they wanted to go for Opera Karina, for example. And basically from a strategic standpoint, the big thing that I noticed here is Joachim. I think Joachim has the potential to be extremely powerful, and I think you might be looking at Joachim and specifically his Stormlash effect if you're thinking ahead toward Legend difficulty of Ciella. I think that we'll talk about this when we get into the individual characters, but it seems like the Dragalia dev team is starting to see a double Affliction Punisher meta in all elements. Right now there is a double Affliction Punisher meta because you can use Frostbite shared skills, and that lets you run a Frostbite Punisher 4-star Wormprint, along with another type of Punisher Wormprint, maybe Poison Punisher at 4-star, or otherwise Burning Punisher or Paralysis Punisher at 5-star, or even Shadowbite Punisher if you're running Karina. But basically, when we get to Legend, we're not going to be able to rely upon other elements. Maybe we can still use off-element shared skills and still use Frostbite shared skills, but given the fact that they're going out of their way to restrict which elements can access the content, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they also give 100% Affliction immunity to these bosses from off-element type afflictions. So what I could see happening is this Frostbite meta, or Frostbite Punisher meta, kind of falls apart when we get Legend difficulty, and all of a sudden you're going to want some of these new afflictions they're putting out so that you can successfully run a double Affliction Punisher build. Basically, I think that's sort of what they're seeding with Shadow Blight on Karina, Flashburn on Ilya, and now the latest thing is Stormlash, I think it's called, on Joachim. And all of these would give a single element access to multiple afflictions. There are some that already had decent access to multiple afflictions, but like this will give access potentially to multiple afflictions where there are relevant Punisher Wormprints. We saw we got that Shadow Blight Wormprint before we even had a character who caused Shadow Blight, right? With Opera Karina, the Wormprint actually came out first, and we haven't gotten one for Flashburn yet. We haven't gotten one for Stormlash yet, but I do sort of see that coming down the road. It feels like that is what is being set up here. That's possibly the next meta for Dragalia Lost. So, in my opinion, Joachim is probably the gem on this showcase as far as meta applications, but that does remain to be seen because Legend difficulty Ciella still seems to be a ways off since we're only likely to get Legend Volk coming up shortly here. So, yeah, I think that really, if you want to plan for the future, that's one consideration as to why you might want Joachim. But ultimately, for co-op play, I would expect that for the Legend difficulty, it's more likely to be like one person in your friend group or one person on your team probably needs to be packing an affliction like that if we do get to that point. and it might not necessarily be you, so maybe you're not the Joachim user, maybe you're not the Opera Karina user or Ilya user when we finally get to Legend of, let's say, Tartarus. But yeah, that's kind of my take on the Summon Showcase. Only go for this if you really like these characters, or if you really want to hedge on Stormlash being a relevant thing for Legend difficulty Ciella. Otherwise, I think that Master Ciella is pretty well broken open. Expert difficulty and below are autoable, and Master's autoable as well, but it's harder to use the gold Fafnirs and get a good reliability there. Expert, you get a pretty decent reliability, although not 100% unless you're well built beyond what I am right now as far as your weapon bonuses and everything. So I would say probably going to be a skip. Even though it is a Gala remix, you do have better 5-star appearance rates. There doesn't appear to be any Gala Dragon on an appearance rate up here, which is one of the things you do tend to want to go for. And Gala Luca and Formal Noelle, I don't really expect to make a big splash. Gala Luca has been around for a while, and he has been good in some of the fast clears of Expert Tartarus. But from what I've seen, the Karina clears have kind of supplanted and replaced a lot of the other types of fast clears that you could do in that content. So yeah, I would say this is probably a skip. It's a quiet period for summoning. Opera Karina and Giovanni's banner also kind of a skip, and this looks like one too. Nevertheless, let us talk about these new characters because there are some interesting things to discuss here. I really like how Formal Noelle was designed in particular, even though I don't think that she's going to be like a game breaker that you have to have. But first of all, I love her portrait. You can see in the full art there's some paintings, or I guess more like drawings that she has. One of them is Victor drawing here. Familiar Victor from one of the Dragalia Life comics, which is cool. And she has a drawing of a dog as well, presumably Helen, but just a picture of a dog, which is kind of cool. Little bird hanging out in the window there, and of course a letter floating by. I really think her formal outfit looks fantastic. As an ambassador, she brings countries together, and she's a win staff. I was curious what weapon they would give her because Noelle is kind of a pacifist type character. She really doesn't see a lot of direct combat action in any of the stories. So I figured it might be a staff. Since they gave her a wand last time, I figured they'd want to do something different if they did keep her in the wind element, that is. And it is a staff, so let's check out her skills. Her first skill is Goodwill Mission. Gradually recovers the entire team's HP for 40 seconds. Wow, pretty long-lasting regen there. And increases their strength for 15 seconds, or by 15% for 60 seconds rather. This strength increase will not stack. So interesting, you don't get any burst heal, you don't get any immediate heal, but you just get a large amount of regen time. Probably a good thing. Buff time will likely work well on her, so you can get additional regen ticks. Will extend out that 40 seconds a good deal, and it sounds like the regen portion will stack even though the strength increase doesn't stack. First skill cooldowns are usually fairly low. Although for healers, they're more homogenized. They're kind of all around the same amount with a few exceptions. So I would imagine you can overlap this, certainly with buff time. I think that within, let's say, 60 seconds, you're probably going to be able to use this multiple times, and it's fairly easy to stack up buff time with the Staff Spoon affinity that's available now in the affinity bonus system on Wormprints. And this is interesting, actually. This kind of reminds me of Templar Hope, the way he's able to stack up so many defense buffs and HP regen ticks as a result. You could probably, one thing to note is these are probably going to be more sizable, right, than what you get off a healing double buff, because this is a proper regen tick, I would think. And therefore, stacking even a few of these might be just as potent as having several Templar Hope regen buffs, I would imagine. The one thing, though, is you're not getting any defense here, which is also an important part of Templar Hope and what he does for a team comp. So I think that she wouldn't really be able to replace him. He still feels like the linchpin in a lot of these autos. Although for Expert, you can kind of mess around if you're using real dragons with a lot of different other setups. But for Master, he's still kind of the linchpin, I think. He is usually run alongside a healer anyway, like Lowen or Grace. So I really think you'd be looking at Noelle more for that slot, but it is kind of notable just how long-lasting her regen is. Her second skill, Grim Missive, is shareable, and it deals wind damage to enemies directly ahead, dispels one buff from each target, and lowers their poison res by 10% for 30 seconds. This resistance reduction will not stack. Alright, zombie Melsa, Halloween Melsa just rolling in her grave right now because this is so sad. Halloween Melsa's one thing going for her was her shared skill. She's actually a decent character, a very high DPS character at the end of the day because all of her DPS is funneled through team DPS, so really it just comes down to who you're buffing. If you're buffing strong characters like Linyu, then she's an excellent addition to a team. She's not too far off from Tobias or any other buff bot, right? But the thing about Halloween Melsa was like she had one kind of useless passive, and then she had this poison shared skill that could reduce the enemy resistance to poison. That was kind of like the thing that made her special. There are a lot of other buff bots, but that was kind of, oh wow, like maybe I share this onto my poisoner and then they can cause more poison. It wasn't ever really a thing, but at least on paper it looked like it could be kind of a cute thing to do. But this one actually is more legit than Melsa's because you get Dispel. It doesn't cause poison, but the likelihood is that you would share this onto a character who does cause poison, and that's why you want this type of effect, and you get the Dispel. That's actually pretty huge here in my opinion. I tend to share Nadine's shared skill pretty often, at least when I was running Master Ciella. I'm kind of on a hiatus from that. I haven't really had a need for running Master Ciella, but that's the shared skill I would go to try to whittle away some of those defensive buffs. And this would certainly be likely a just better candidate in that fight because with its length, if you're running a typical type of run, it can last a while. You might run up against the cap on poison resistance, and then the secondary effect on this will also come in handy. But yeah, having a potentially ranged Dispel option, another Dispel shared skill besides the likes of Naveed and Lapis, I guess Nadine, and then Ronzel, who is available for free. Well, this is pretty good. I'm glad that we have another Dispel shared skill. And the poison res reduction could be relevant. A little hard to say. One thing of note, neither of Noelle's skills cause poison. And that is relevant when looking at her co-ability and chain co-ability. Mostly her chain co-ability, of course, because it does buff the user whenever somebody, well, it buffs somebody who afflicts the enemy with poison on your team. Yeah, the user being the one who does the affliction. So like, it's not going to buff Noelle if somebody else on your team does poison. It's going to buff them. But it can't really directly buff Noelle unless you share a skill onto her because she can't actually directly poison an enemy. So that's kind of worth noting. Otherwise, for her abilities, Freeze Res and Poison Punisher. Poison Punisher a little bit surprising to see here. I kind of think that just maybe a strength ability might have been a little bit better. Poison Punisher probably has more upside for DPS, but I think something like 15% strength or 13% strength, HP 70% might have been just as respectable to get a little bit higher regen ticks. Punisher's not going to help with your healing at all. Then again, healers tend to heal for more than enough these days, so perhaps it's better to just have Punisher, even though I'm just sort of looking at Noelle and like thinking to myself, what is the outlet by which she's dealing, a good amount of damage? First of all, she has no way to poison, so you're going to want somebody on the team that can poison, but that's pretty common in the wind element. But maybe this Grin Missive has a pretty good damage modifier. That's the one thing I can think of, because this actually is her one damage dealing skill. Otherwise, it's just going to be like extra damage on her autos, maybe extra damage if she's running Midgard's Armor 0, probably a pretty respectable dragon for her, and does good damage in dragon form with the dragon skill as well. So I suppose she could be a good damage-oriented healer with this type of passive. Besides that, her first ability is Resolute Ambassador 2. So using Goodwill Mission, her first skill, gives her the Friendly Ties effect. When it's active, her next Force Strike will increase the entire team's max HP by 15% for the remainder of the quest. Once HP buffs reach the limit, an HP recovery effect is granted instead. This effect cannot stack and will be consumed on use. Alright, this is a pretty good ability to see here, because one of the things that makes Lowen so dominant as a wind healer, and even as a flame healer, frankly, with his Halloween ult, is the max HP buff that he provides. It can stack up to 30% total, and it's really solid for increasing the survivability of your teams, particularly in these types of auto comps, but in general in Master Ciella. If you're not familiar with that fight, there's a lot of things that can potentially go wrong with the rebounding arrows it's easy to stack up and accumulate damage via vulnerability and some of the screen-wide AoEs. So having an emergency heal on your 4-strike once this caps off is nice, first of all, but also just giving extra tankiness to everybody in your party if you're in co-op, let's say, or even if you're doing an auto. I think that she can probably replace Lowen in autos here. It's not perfect. Well, actually, it's probably okay. Regular Lowen's defense buff and max HP buff are on his second skill. Halloween Lowen, his defense buff is on his first skill and his HP max buff is on his second skill. But regular Lowen both are on his second skill, which is slower to charge. So it's not like regular Lowen really has high frequency defense buffs and is contributing that much to the double F nonsense on your team. So I do think that Formal Noelle will be a pretty good replacement for regular Lowen in that respect. But the one thing I would sort of caution is regular Lowen can, he can cleanse Bog and he has Bog Res. I think that's actually a little bit more relevant than it may first appear, just because in Ciella, Bog tends to be more fatal than Freeze. This is why like Hawks often die, is if you get bogged, there's no way that you can easily avoid the bolts from above, the purple bolts that rain down upon you. It's just extremely difficult. Maybe you can get healed through it somehow, but it's very difficult, and Bog lasts a long time, and while you're bogged, you can't shapeshift. If you're frozen, somebody can break you out of freeze, and then you could potentially survive. But if you're bogged, unless Lowen's there to cleanse you, or somebody has a Lowen shared skill or something, like, you're probably in really bad shape to survive. So, yeah, I think that the freeze res is actually a little bit more of a vulnerability. You could patch this up with Wormprint and give her 100% bog res if needed, but that might be her one little vulnerability here. But the max HP buffs, great to see. This is such a rare buff that there's only a few shared skills that can increase max HP, being Sanoa is one of them, it's random, and the other one being Cassandra's, which only works on the user who's casting the shared skill, and it's pretty slow to accumulate. So, yeah, I'm glad to see this. This is actually a fairly competitive healer with regular Lowen. Looks to be a more DPS-oriented healer just with this Chainco ability and the Poison Punisher ability as well. I think that there's a promising shared skill here, but I think for a lot of us who already invested in Lowen or already have some of the comp set up to auto and solo Ciella and light content reliably, and I said like, not light, so similar content. Yeah, I just don't think Formal Noelle really does anything for us. But thinking ahead to Legend, could the DPS check be tight enough that Lowen is just not cutting it as a healer, and somehow Formal Noelle is like putting you over the top as a team? Possibly. I mean, it doesn't seem that likely that her DPS contribution will matter all that much, but possibly. I mean, I would think, just looking at it, I mean, I would think Akasha probably has as much DPS potential to offer compared to Formal Noelle, although the poison resistance resetting thing could be a relevant factor. But like, the thing to remember in co-op is this Chainco ability is not going to be very good because it only really affects Noelle. It only affects the character you're bringing into battle. And yeah, so in co-op, I just don't see there being a lot of DPS potential here. I mean, sure, your autos are going to do a little more because of Poison Punisher, and Grimissive will do a little bit more to poison enemies and everything. But yeah, Formal Noelle, cute character, fun kit, good healer looks like, but not anything irreplaceable from what I see. Okay, now let's talk about Formal Joachim. Guess it's time to put up or shut up. Also looking very dapper, very regal in his formal attire. Love the hat, love the cape there, looks really good. Let's talk about his kit. He is a long-range Manicaster, just like Sharpshooter Joe and just like Ilya, but he is our first Manicaster of the Wind element. We're starting to round out these Manicasters pretty quickly between Lapis and now Joachim. We're only missing the Flame element and Shadow element, and I think we all have a feeling about who's going to appear for Flame, perhaps even at the end of this month in a Gala banner. So I'll just say that about Flame. But as for Joachim, Joachim's skills are Hound Shot and Ace Operator. Hound Shot is shareable, deals wind damage to enemies in the lines, and inflicts Storm Lash, new affliction. If this skill is used directly after Ace Operator, which is his second skill, Ace Operator's attack will be interrupted and the following variant of the skill will be used instead. Deals wind damage to enemies directly ahead and inflicts Storm Lash and Poison. And Ace Operator inflicts enemies directly ahead with Poison. Alright, this is one we're probably going to have to see in practice because we've never really had a skill where you can use another skill to interrupt it, I don't think. If my memory serves, I don't think we've had a skill where, like, during the cut-in animation of the skill, you can actually press another button and use a different skill. So it sounds like that's how this will work, where you can use Ace Operator and then immediately use Hound Shot, and somehow your Ace Operator would have still been going, but it gets interrupted, and Hound Shot does both Storm Lash and Poison. So it kind of subsumes what Ace Operator was doing because it's an attack that does poison. I would assume that probably with this interruption method you maybe get a little bit more damage as well or something like that. And both modes of Hound Shot cause Storm Lash, which is good. Presumably, like, we don't know anything about how Storm Lash works, but probably another damage over time affliction if I had to guess. Probably a 21-second type of duration, similar to Frostbite and Shadow Blight and Flashburn. That seems to be the direction that the Dragalia dev team has taken with afflictions lately, ever since Frostbite came out, is these longer lasting afflictions. So that's why I think that if there's ever a Punisher print for Storm Lash, Joachim is going to become extremely relevant, with him being the only source of Storm Lash right now. For co-abilities, he has the standard Gauge Accelerator 20% seen on all other mana casters, and then Storm Lash equals user water res plus 8%. Probably only going to apply to him unless you shared his skill into somebody else, then I guess they could get some extra water res, but in solo this really doesn't seem too relevant except for him, and co-op it's basically just going to give him a little bit of extra water res. And then his abilities are very straightforward: Storm Lash Punisher 30%, Poison Punisher 30%, Freeze Res 100%. Again, I would say Freeze Res probably a little bit less desirable than Bog Res in a vacuum. Could Legend perhaps change Ciella's mechanics and make it so all of a sudden Freeze is a lot more dangerous than Bog? Probably. I mean, it's feasible. They could really do anything they want with Legend. So something to consider there. But as for Storm Lash Punisher and Poison Punisher, having 60% Punisher is very obscene. Like, this is just potentially, when you have both Poison and Storm Lash on the enemy, it's a lot of extra damage. So this is why I think Joachim stands out here as probably the most likely candidate to be meta-influential, and particular in the Legend difficulty, but he could possibly break through if they release a Storm Lash Punisher print relatively quickly. He could possibly break through even in Master Ciella right now and speed up some of the wind rooms that you find there by letting everybody get access to Storm Lash Punisher via print and him being the source of it. Yeah, I think he's very strong. If he has a decent damage modifier on his skills, having that much Punisher, and then you think about Plaguebringer's 25% additional Punisher on a Worm print, and whatever Storm Lash Punisher there is, if there is one, it seems really strong. Maybe there won't be a Storm Lash Punisher print for a while as a way of counterbalancing this, but Joachim looks good. And another strike against any kind of homogenized design with mana casters. I really thought with Ilya and Joe that we were going to continue to see dash-oriented mechanics, at least for the long-range casters, because Lapis kind of blew that out of the water with her being a rapid-fire style. But Joachim doesn't have any dash-related things unless they hid some type of passive on him like they did with Sharina back in the day. And I wouldn't be that surprised if they did, honestly, because it feels like Sharina kind of just got her passive like as an afterthought because Hunter Vanessa happened to have the same one and they hadn't designed a Light Lance in a while. Like, it was just an artifact in the code or something. So if Joachim ends up with some kind of like secret dash passive, I wouldn't be that surprised. But as of now, it looks like the dash dream is over. For whatever reason, they just made Joe and Ilya very similar in their design with the dash mechanics, and now the main casters since then have been more diverse in their design. But Joachim looks very strong to me. At a glance, his modifiers could be pretty low, and I think he could still be strong with the Punisher, but if he has like 1,000% modifier or something, that's probably still enough. If he has more than that, he's likely to be very strong. Okay, now let's look at Gala Luca. So Gala Luca is a character who's been around before. Gala Luca kind of emerged in some of the first really quick light element clears of Tartarus' Wrath on the expert difficulty, especially with the advent of Gala Thor. One of the cool things about Gala Luca is that his first skill, Shining Slash, it deals light damage to enemies in a line, and its critical rate, as well as the critical rate of attack skills when you're a dragon, are increased by 10% for each buff with a different icon applied to the user. So just by having a variety of buffs, you can get an extra critical rate on that skill, as well as your dragon skill, which is great for Thor, or probably Daikokuten as well. But with Thor, you're getting energy buffs constantly. You're probably getting some inspiration buffs if you happen to have Lucretia in your backline. With Daikokuten, once you use your skill, you can get attack rate buffs as well. But that will probably happen. That will happen after you use the skill, so the extra critical rate wouldn't necessarily apply. But Daikokuten has a great dragon form. In any case, good skill, good mobility shared skill. Although I think in version 2.0, mobility is less of a consideration with shared skills. If you're not aware of what I'm talking about, the animation for this skill, he dashes through the enemy and ends up behind them. Pre 2.0, sometimes skills like that were good for positioning in auto comps, usually explosive auto comps that relied upon doing high damage in a short duration. Wanted skills like that to try position your characters just the right way. After 2.0, a lot of more auto comps are focused on grindiness and defensive survival because of the need for rupees, so a lot more auto comps are incorporating gold Fafnirs. If you're not incorporating gold Fafnirs and going for consistency instead, you'll often find you're going to be at a massive rupee deficit when you collect all of the materials you need. So I think that is kind of one thing that's led some of these positional skills to fall out of favor a little bit. They're really mainly used to set yourself up in like the first few seconds of a fight. Think of like Volk. There's a lot happening at the beginning of Volk's fight. You might want to get behind him or something with phase 1 of Expert. Another example, High Zodiarch, you want to get behind him so that he would spew his breath behind him and as opposed to toward everybody in your party. Another example is High Brunhilde. She also has a breath attack. So High Brunhilde, High Zodiarch, no longer as relevant in 2.0. Like, you have Bane effects. You can just either explode them with damage, or you can have a more tanky run. Both can be done using gold Fafnirs. You don't really need this as a shared skill for either of those. And with something like Volk, like, it never really ended up panning out too well to try position behind him. It's just something that I tested and others probably tested as they were trying to figure out a better way to crack phase 1. Volk is fully autoable at this point. If you're using regular dragons, and with gold Fafnirs, it's not as consistent. But it can be done, it's just not really that reliable. So anyway, all that to say, I don't think you really need to share this as a skill, but I do think when it's shared, it will affect your dragon skill critical damage, so that is something to consider. Also just a very cool looking skill. If you haven't seen it, again, it dashes through the enemy, but when you arrive on the other side, a part that I didn't mention is all of these slashes appear in a delayed response on the body of the enemy. It looks very cool. Gala Luca's second skill is Brilliant Booster, adds 80% to the modifier applied to the user's critical damage for 10 seconds. Good amount of extra critical damage. You don't see this amount of extra critical damage too often. This is like Mitsuba territory, actually more, with 80% instead of hers, I think, being 50%. But obviously she's causing the inspiration to force through a critical rate. And otherwise, Gala Luca has strength plus 10%, above 10 hits equals shadow res plus 10%. His first ability is going to give him different types of critical rates buffs with different icons. Let's see. It gives him 4% for every buff with a different icon. In addition, applies one of the following buffs to Luca every time one of his attacks is a critical hit. Sylvan, Secret Arts, Human Wisdom, and Roken Expertise. Each of these buffs increases Luca's critical rate by 3% for 20 seconds. So it has two separate effects. One of them is this 28% passive critical rate that's invisible that you won't see. And the other one is each of these individual 3% critical rate buffs. Gala Luca can basically get up to like a very high amount of critical rate, to where his first skill is almost always going to be dealing critical damage. The second skill is Curse Res, but it's essentially Potent Curse Res because, a variant on Potent Curse Res, I should say. When you get afflicted by something or hit by something that would cause curse, you get critical rate instead of strength, which is what you got with Potent Curse Res. And then finally he has Flurry Devastation, which increases his critical rate further when the combo count is 15 or higher. So yeah, Gala Luca is one of those characters who benefits from having critical damage in the back line. He's a strong character, fine character, but in my opinion, not a really strong reason to summon. We got Mordecai very recently. If you were here for the 2nd anniversary, was the welfare for the raid. You could get him to 50 notes for free. Right now we're in an Eldwater crunch. It's hard to justify building Gala Luca when Mordecai probably better for auto comps as we head toward increased auto ability, even of things like Tartarus. So for me, Gala Luca, he can be used. You're probably better off investing in Karina right now, sad to say, but Gala Luca going to be a fan favorite for some players who really like Luca. And that's pretty much all I have to say about all three of these adventurers. I will probably not summon on this showcase or the Opera Karina one. It's tough. It's a tough decision because I am trying to main the bow and Manicaster weapons as far as where I've gotten my weapon bonuses so far. And we just happened to get two showcases back to back that are not the most lucrative, but did happen to have a bow and Manicaster. So I'm going to have to make the tough call on these and probably skip. But that is going to do it for this video, everyone. So let me know in the comments below whether you will be skipping or summoning on this Gala Dragalia remix. Thank you as always for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.